Per usual, living on this channel is for educational purposes only, and it's not intended as financial advice. It's Wednesday. Let's take a look at some alts. Now, admittedly, I won't have good news here for the most part. If you're bullish, I don't think that's a surprise. I think the 5 people that are still here trading alts think they can will the market to go up. The problem is the liquidity just isn't there. The liquidity is going elsewhere, either into risk off or Bitcoin, and it's not even coming into Bitcoin per se. So we need general flows into the ecosystem for alts to do well. Otherwise, the inflation of the coins themselves, the emissions of the coins themselves, the unlocks of the coins themselves just drag prices lower. That's just what happens. In the absence of buyers, sellers take over on balance, right? And that's certainly what we've seen continuously since, we'll be generous and say mid-2022. When the wheels fell off the wagon with Luna, 3AC, FTX, Celsius, right, all that other stuff, that certainly pushed alts significantly lower. But since then, it certainly hasn't been a free ride. You know, it's been just nonstop drip, drip, drip. Once again, we're at an interesting support level. This is the total market cap of alts minus stables minus wrapped Bitcoin. Not even the best representation to look at this sort of thing, but it's some index estimate. And until we get back above this resistance, diagonal resistance, at the very least, we lean pretty bearish. Across the board, the expectation looking at something like this relative to single coins is, yes, everything should kind of look like this. It should kind of be bearish. Anything that doesn't look like this should be put in a different bucket and deserves attention. Something like Link, right, where it has a 1.5 year range. It's near the top of its range. It's not at the bottom, right? That isn't to say it's a massive buy or there's this massive bullish play in the moment, but it's just not behaving like the entirety of the market per se, right? So my expectation for this has gone from maybe a potential inverted head and shoulders play to descending triangle almost certainly now, and that means lower lows eventually. You know, it may happen slowly, it may happen quickly, but certainly don't expect higher highs in the moment until liquidity comes back into the ecosystem. And you could say, well, I knew that all along. Things have been bad for a while. That's fine, but I'm just looking at TA here. And certainly aren't looking too bullish on the altcoin side of things. Now we can also look at Bitcoin dominance, which just like Total 3, just like anything on TradingView, the altcoin bucket gets adjusted from time to time as far as what goes in that bucket. So we'll just take it for face value here. And it's been Bitcoin season based on the 200-day EMA since the beginning of the year. Certainly since we broke out above the horizontal range. And I certainly think bullish continuation is possible, is likely. There doesn't seem to be much of an appetite for altcoins at the moment. One way you can measure the liquidity picture outside of looking at some macroeconomic data, you know, just look at the stablecoin flows and say what you want about Tether. It's still flat. It's still around 84 billion-ish, slightly up maybe week over week. USDC continues to bleed despite offering 5% yield by just holding it. So it is not having a fun time here. The theory of some vampire attack where you issue Tether and redeem through USDC is certainly still possible, but we aren't seeing a lot of demand for USDC, which is more of a DeFi stablecoin anyway, whereas Tether is truly, you know, an offshore proxy for dollar activity, and USDC is more seen as government coin. That's my interpretation of what people are thinking overseas, which also doesn't help this market share picture for USDC. So it's a few things, right? But collectively tells you, yeah, we're probably not in alt season based on continuous USDC redemptions and lack of general activity here. So the moment this perks up, I'll be the first one to champion it. But in the moment, USDC continues to bleed, bleed, bleed. And speaking of bleed, 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 you know, maybe the altcoin market is waiting for resolution on Binance, some closure on Binance. It seems like we have a headline every other day. I think yesterday was Brazil, legal entanglements with Binance. There was some talks of Hamas accounts at Binance being closed. I mean, there's just no good headlines or good reasons, in my opinion, to hold BNB, to have any coins on Binance, any Binance related products. It's just continuing to scream risk off, risk off, risk off. And then there's the BNB technical analysis, which just continues to lean bearish, right? This continues, at least to me, again, looks like it's ready to fall off a cliff. Potentially 100, potentially 50, I don't know. But it doesn't look like it's going to hold this. And the question I think everyone's asking is when this actually breaks below 200 for good, what's going to happen to the rest of the market? Bitcoin down today pretty significantly relative to ETH, but ETH also looks like it's on some sort of cliff ready to jump off. We'll get to that in a second. Just looking at the DeFi Llama centralized exchange transparency flows since September 1st, according to wallets that DeFi Llama is able to track, Binance has had 1.4 billion of outflows. They still have plenty in the tank, according to on-chain wallets. So those are the assets. The problem is we don't know the liabilities here, right? And that's the problem with proof of reserves. You don't know both sides of the equation. So this is a great first step, but we're about to find out pretty soon here, right? How much does Binance have in the tank realistically relative to liabilities? I think a true test of proof of reserves, and a good one, is coming up here relative to what's going to happen with Binance. And I think we'll get to a point where the US exchanges are solvable. Certainly the chain analytics side, I'm sure, knows what's going on there. And that includes Gemini as well, even though Gemini self-reports their numbers. You can see Kraken's numbers here, 3.2 billion with some inflows. So this is where we need to live. This is where we want to be. We want to know, at a bare minimum, what are the on-chain assets picture? What does that look like? Maybe it's a false sense of security, but it's something, right? It's some information. We can dig a little deeper, just broadly looking at Bitcoin sitting on exchanges, continues to decline, slightly up maybe week over week, but the trend, the multi-year trend, has been people continuing to pull Bitcoin off exchanges. This is from Crypto Quant. I don't think my account has any special privileges, so this is just a free Crypto Quant account. And then there's ETH, which also continues to get pulled off exchanges. During the DeFi heyday, ETH off centralized exchanges made sense because you could get yield for that. Now in the proof of stake era, it continues to make sense because you can get a yield for that. I don't believe they're counting the proof of stake values here in the reserve side of things, but that would be something else useful to know, right? Which exchange has XYZ coin staking? What's the reserves there? Basically a full on-chain audit of what's going on. That information is available sparsely. You know, it's easier to see for ETH than most other coins, but we're getting to the point where we're just going to have, you know, the full open book of what's going on in all these exchanges. Here's the Link exchange reserve. Somebody was asking me about this on a stream last week, and has also sort of trended down since entering the range here in mid 2022. I'm guessing that this big spike was a Smart Contract Limited, who's the company behind Link, some sort of sell or some sort of move to Binance, which they have done historically. So if we are in a range like this, to me, you know, again, look, I don't think Link, the coin, needs to exist at all, but it does. And here we are, and we're looking at the TA. Historically, I've been very negative on Link, especially with the company selling. But if we are in a range and coins are being pulled off of exchanges, generally, to me, that should be bullish. Now, they may be moving to DEXs or some other environment where they're tradable. But what I don't want to see when we're flat and boring is people depositing coins to sell them. And that's not what we're seeing here, in my opinion, for Link. Now let's talk about some TA for ETH. And, you know, look, no matter how generous you want to be with this ascending triangle, with the future of Ethereum, you know, you can list 10 reasons why you think Ethereum is going to 8,000, 10,000. I'm not saying eventually you're going to be right or you're never going to be wrong or whatever, right? I'm just talking about right here, right now, for the next 6 months. We're below the cloud. We are below the multi-month ascending triangle, and it just continues to lean more and more bearish for me. The ultimate target for the break of the previous pattern would be somewhere between 1,100 and 1,300. It's been a very slow grind down. We've had a bunch of news in here. We're potentially getting more news on the GBTC side of things on Friday if the SEC decides to appeal, or they don't. If they don't, it should be bullish. We've obviously got spot Bitcoin ETF stuff brewing eventually. So there's certainly, in my mind, a lot of hopium and copium, just broadly, that's helping keep this up. And that includes Bitcoin, okay? It's just the entire market. But much like BNB, to me, it looks like it's ready to fall off a cliff. And if we just treat that as a range and just say, look, this whole thing from 1,000 to 2,000 is a mega massive range that we're in now, the volume profile looks to show support between 1200, 1300, right? Which makes sense based on the measured move. It's not out of the question that we see that. So for me, I have to trade around that appropriately or hedge appropriately relative to my ETH spot holdings, which admittedly is extremely small. Based on the alligator fractal stuff, the alligator, the moving averages have flipped bearish, and we did cross a support fractal a few days ago. So even after this little excitement relative to the futures ETFs for ETH, the moving averages and the fractals are telling you to continue to short, continue to look for shorts, and continue to expect lower lows. Not really that much of a surprise. Alternatively, the ETH chart, the grayscale ETH product, still has a pretty large discount, which continues to shrink. This chart is almost the exact opposite of the spot chart. To me, this looks maybe not extremely bullish, but certainly looks more bullish than the spot chart. Potentially printed in inverted head and shoulders if it decides to save itself here. May retest 12 again. But this is a completely different picture than the spot chart to me. And ultimately, until this discount closes, this is probably going to be the better trade because this is probably going to see flows, whereas spot ETH will not necessarily get those flows. And at the very least, you've got a shrinking discount on your side as a tailwind. There's also an unfilled price gap from 1750 to 19, let's say. So that would certainly be the longer term target, but ultimately anything above 12 here on ETH to me is incredibly bullish. Still barely holding above the cloud, but I would much rather buy and hold this and trade this than spot in the moment. Another problem with ETH is obviously the lack of burn in the past month. This isn't a big deal, but it certainly doesn't help if things are already bearish. And again, those back to my opening statement about emissions and inflation, like, look, it's not that much of a big deal. At the end of the day, it's nothing, right? But we're not burning. We're adding to the problem instead of subtracting from the problem. This will flip eventually. It'll burn. It'll go to 10,000, like whatever, right? I'm not worried about that. I'm talking about right now what's going to happen with ETH within the next couple of months here, not setting itself up for a bullish environment. On the ETH BTC side of things, sold off considerably last week, made a new multi-month low, and ultimately everyone's looking at this 05 level. I think this idea, this pattern ends with capitulation. I think it ends with lower lows. It ends with puke to the downside. In spot, ETH doesn't have to do anything, right? It just has to not keep up with Bitcoin, whether that's on a spot Bitcoin ETF approval, whether that's based on flows following that approval, whatever it is. ETH is certainly not going to be first. Okay. So ultimately I'm a buyer of ETH relative to Bitcoin way down here at around 03. Until then, the general trend is probably down until we're back above the weekly cloud at the very least. This could, over the next 6 months, jump around in the weekly cloud and then pop out above it. Sure, then I'm back on board. But right now, this is just downward chop. And relative to Bitcoin, in the moment, ETH just continues to be not the play, and you're reminded of that almost every week with lower lows. Before I talk about any of the other altcoins today, let me mention today's video sponsor, Kraken Pro. Kraken Pro is a complete overhaul of the Kraken trading experience with one-stop shop for advanced and professional traders. Kraken Pro enables efficient trading execution across multiple markets with a UI that allows for unique optimization tailored to your trading style. You can check out Kraken Pro with a link in the description of this video. And we'll just take a look at volume real quick. Bitcoin volume up, maybe a high on the week, maybe just based on being down almost 3% on the day. Tether volume still overtaking that. If we go to the layer ones, take a look at Sol. And generally, again, across the board, don't expect anything to be happening here. Not really. This may morph eventually into another attempt at an inverted head and shoulders. You really want this above, what is this level here? 25. Above 25 and we're alive. But until then, probably just continues to chop around. And if we want to just measure where this could go, 25 from 32 to 36, sure. But I'm not expecting any miracles here. In the near term, I haven't heard of any friend tech clones or anything being done on Solana, but that's maybe the next step is start to copy and paste whatever's successful flavor of the day, flavor of the month type stuff. I know AVAX tried that and it's been a massive debacle, but something that Solana could do. Ripple, again, We are in a massive range. It's dead money. I don't know who trades this. I don't know why. There's just no there. No setups, no nothing. Cardano looks like it continues to want lower lows. And again, you can see that just general appetite for a descending triangle. And this is not where you want to be. You also don't want to print anything that looks like a head and shoulders, right? At the bottom, okay? Regardless of whether or not this is quote unquote real, you don't want to make these fractals if you're having this expectation of bullishness, right? You could say, well, Josh, this is a falling wedge. And sure, look, maybe in a parallel universe, this thing wedges out. I could see that, but I'm not a buyer. It doesn't look bad enough to buy. Volume's still relatively flat. I'd want to see this break lows and then we'll see what happens. But this does not look like a coin that wants to go up right now. And potentially, we're talking sub 10 cents on Cardano. DOT, what can you say? Again, the inflation and emissions story continues to play out for coins that just are not seeing activity or use. It's just math, If ETH is struggling, and ETH is the darling child of the world, right, relative to DeFi, I certainly can't expect any other coin to be holding up. Where could this go? Honestly, I don't know for DOT. And just as a reminder, I always love to bring up the comp chart for people who are maybe in denial that, we can't go lower than listing price. Oh, we can. We can go much lower than listing price. And comp certainly did. So I would not feel safe or comfy holding on to DOT here. For LTC, same story. Doesn't look like there's any bullishness. 404 bullishness not found. Really testing that diagonal support again. And the story I can't get away from on everything, again, going back to this, right? We are knocking on the door to go lower on almost every single alt chart. And it is just very hard to find anything that doesn't look very, very miserable. BCH also ranging, also looks like dead money. Talk about a project that has absolutely terrible fundamentals. Same thing with Stellar. Again, it's a Ripple fork, so it's no surprise that we've retraced all this from the initial pop. I wish I had good things to say. I just don't, right? The first story is always the emissions inflation, and then the second story is always who's doing anything with this stuff. AVEX had a little mini pop on the Friendtech copy paste that got hacked. It was kind of a PR disaster from a optics perspective. And no surprise, this thing continues to look bearish. The problem with buying any of this stuff down here is thinking that it can't go lower. I would much rather buy strength than attempt to figure out where the ultimate bottom is and try to be a hero. I just don't see a point in that. Tezos, much like AVEX and DOT, just continues to make lower lows. Tron looks okay, right? And we can look at moving averages. It's done well. The cloud, it's above the cloud. I looked at it the other day. I just don't know who buys this, who uses this. It's more of an East versus West thing. I know. I don't personally trust the chain's decentralization aspects, so I would never bother touching that. Algo, look how long that cross has been. For people who don't think MA crosses are useful, they're super useful at the top or bottom of a trend, right? So, this thing's been bearish for almost 2 years, and the bull cross, if it comes ever again, certainly important to pay attention to, but we're not anywhere close to that, right? Certainly not expecting Algo to randomly turn around. ETC, again, I don't even need to say it, right? You're continuously seeing this descending triangle picture everywhere, and it's to the point where you almost expect a full retrace of anything that broke out in 2021, which would almost be, another 80% drawdown or something, 60% drawdown for ETC. Dash, had somebody ask me about this as well. No volume at the bottom of the range, multi-year lows. Who's using this thing? I don't know. There would have to be a very compelling reason for me to sell Bitcoin into any of these alts based on how they look. Just not seeing it. Let's take a look at some DeFi stuff, which had done, we'll say, better than some of the layer ones. Certainly Maker It looked pretty good. I'd been saying over the past couple of weeks, it's just kind of over as a trading idea. I expect chop, I expect range. I don't expect anything super bullish going forward. If you caught this one, congrats. It's one of the few that's actually moved. At some point, I talked about it as a multi-shouldered head and shoulders or something here, obviously. So there was a setup there. And this is the stuff, to me, that is much worthier of attention relative to everything else, right? I don't want to sit in a coin that's at lows, ready to go lower, ready to just make me miserable. Like this, right? It's been ranging for months and months and months. It's at the bottom of the range. It's at the middle of a multi-year range. I just don't see the need to get excited about something like this. Now, if it sets up for another triple bottom or something, you can even see here, it didn't even break out per se. But if it sets up for that in the long term, sure. In the near term, there's no there. Aave, same story as generally everything across the board. Looks very much just ready to nose her down eventually here. But if it can get back above diagonal resistance, sure. There's probably a cloud here. Yeah, still below the cloud. So still generally ranging and down. Looks like PAX G getting some volume here. It's the gold token, and gold zoomed way out is certainly a potential cup and handle. You're looking at basically the handle here from 2020 onward. Gold has done well relative to everything else. It's an option. I don't think there's a trade here per se in the moment, but it's good to know it exists on Kraken and is a tradable pair. Certainly looks better than these altcoins. Curve continues to go lower. I don't know what else to say for some of this stuff. Not expecting it to magically turn around. Uni, same thing, right? You're seeing this chart on every chart. Again, it's not a surprise. That's the index effectively. Bancor, I haven't looked at this one in a long time. At least this is ranging. I'd have to figure out if there's some potential news here, something going on. But similarly to Link, I would rather take a punt and a stab at something that looks like this versus something that's knocking on lows or making lower lows, right? I hope that's common sense for people, but sometimes I'm just not sure. Wi-Fi, oh boy. Yeah. And in the absence of general DeFi bullishness, most of DeFi should just continue to go lower. We'll take a look at comp again. It's got the DYDX syndrome, right? In the middle of a range, barely broke out of its inverted head and shoulders that it established over the previous year. So definitely not a maker, that's for sure. SNX still in a range, maybe one day above $3, something to pay attention to, but it also still has this, lower highs syndrome where it's ready for a potential retest of lows here. Just no good news really anywhere. ZRX, haven't looked at this one in a long time as well. Same thing. Again, generally it's we're coming down, folks. Just nose her down, ready for lows. Sushi, same thing. Just continuous lower lows. I'm guessing 1 inch is also the same. Continues. These are DEX tokens like ZRX. Just continues to go lower. Let's take a look at Link on the Web3 side of things. And yes, this is in a multi-month range. It's not making lows. It's making higher lows. I don't love it, to be clear, but again, it looks much different than what we're seeing on most of the coins in the DeFi ecosystem. This one has an eventual shot at doing something. I wouldn't personally load the boat, not investment advice, but certainly looks better than what's going on elsewhere. Filecoin, didn't they have some conference recently? Again, it's just the issuance and the circulating supply and the lack of buyers, the lack of arguably utility for a lot of this stuff just means we continue to go lower. Here's Atom, still kind of in this parabolic puke, probably retests this 2021 low at some point around $5. Not looking too hot. Storage, there was a bunch of coins floating around exchanges the other day. This is kind of like an AWS play, cloud storage type thing. I don't really know what's going on here, but at least it's at the highs, so you can say that. What else we got here? Let's look at ENS, which is Ethereum naming service, the web domain for your wallet, essentially. still at lows. And this is something that has a ton of utility that I know people use. It just, doesn't matter. Band is the link competitor, also at lows. Just not looking great across the board. Check EOS and MATIC real quick. EOS continues to just make lower lows. I don't know who trades this. I don't know. I never hear anything about it anymore. MATIC lower lows. No new daily lows, but not multi-week lows. Doesn't look like it has any strength here. We'll just take a look at Monero, Zeke, and Ripple. Doge. Monero, Zeke, and Doge. Monero is ranging, holding its range, not making lows. Didn't break down. Doesn't look horrible. Don't hate it, don't love it. Certainly looks better than most everything, and certainly looks better than Zcash, which continues to just melt. And lastly here, let's take a look at Doge, which unsurprisingly, like most altcoin charts that are still up significantly from their 2021 lows, just knocking on the door for lower. So look, across the board, for me, I wish it wasn't the case, but short-term treasuries are certainly a much better play than most of these alts. I think there's just nothing but pain, anguish, and devastation. That's just where we're at in the market right now. That's all for this one. On that fine, happy note, like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.